Well, good morning, everybody. Amen. It's a good day today. You know what? The weather's great. These are kind of the days where being outside is actually not that bad. The only thing I wish I had right now is sweet tea. Anybody on the sweet tea train with me? Yes. There's a couple people here. You know what's good. Well, hey, today we are going to be continuing our series on stepping into the unknown, but today we're going to be talking about the idea of escaping from fear. And here's one of the things that I realized about fear is that, one, even as a pastor, I deal with it all the time. And especially when it comes to God, fear just becomes such a real, reality. Because there's so many times where God asks me to step out in faith, and fear makes me question God's sanity. I don't know if you've ever done that. I do that all the time. I question God's sanity all the time. I pray and I ask God, are you crazy? And I know sometimes we don't really want to admit that, but I know that feeling. Where God challenges you and God confronts you and God speaks to you and you know it's his voice, but at the same time you're like, okay, God, I hope you're crazy. Because what you're asking me to do just seems so insane. Because what you're asking me to do raises my anxiety level to the point where I feel like my hair is going to fall out. And that happens so many times. And it's really interesting because you would think that being a pastor, I've seen God heal. I've seen people deliver from addiction instantaneously. I've seen God do the miraculous. And even knowing all that, seeing all that, having experienced all that, there are still moments where fear just gets the best of me. I think of Elijah. If you don't know who Elijah was, he is the prophet of God. So essentially, he is the mouthpiece, the spokesperson. He's the secretary of press, if you want to have a title to it. When God has a message for his people, he would use Elijah. And Elijah had a really interesting life. If you want to read his story, it's in 1 Kings. It's actually a really good read. And he has this one encounter, though, where he's having this confrontation with King Ahab. Ahab and has his priest, his shamans, who are, going to call down on Baal, who was their god. And Elijah says, well, let's have a showdown. And so they have this showdown up on the mountain, and it's Old Testament, it's biblical proportions. They're like, all right, first I'm going to call down fire from heaven, wins. And we're not racing, for who gets the most likes on Instagram. It's like we're racing for slips. It's life and death. And so the shamans for Ahab, they're out there, they're beating themselves up, they're going, all that stuff, and they were just going for it. No fire from heaven. Elijah says, you know what? Pour some water on the wood. And he's like, Jesus, God, send fire from heaven. Bam, done. Now he goes Old Testament on and kills them, slaughters them all. Has this epic moment. This moment where you're like literal fire from heaven, seeing God do the miraculous, seeing God do amazing things. And right after this moment, he gets a letter from the queen. And the queen's like, you killed my priest. You killed my shaman. By this time tomorrow, I will do to you what you did to them. And he runs. It sends him on the run. After just experiencing the miraculous, after just experiencing God do great and amazing things, this fear grips him, and he leaves, and he goes out into the wilderness, and he basically finds a spot where he's like, you know what? This is a good place to die. Because he literally says, and he prays to God, and he says, you know what, God? Take me now. I want to go hang out with my grandpa in heaven. Because I'm done. This is it. And God does something really interesting. For the next 40 days and 40 nights, he takes care of him. He feeds him. He shelters him. And he does all of this. And as he's doing all of this, he takes him from where he is at to a different place. And when they get there, God has this conversation with Elijah. It's found in 1 Kings chapter 19, starting in verse 9. It says, "Then the word of God came to him. So Elijah, what are you doing here?" And Elijah's response is this: "I've been working my heart out for the God of the angel armies. The people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, destroyed the places of worship, murdered your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." I find it just interesting the fact that God takes care of him for 40 days and 40 nights, leads him through the wilderness, and then God asks him, "Hey, why are you here?" Personally, I would have been like, "Well, you brought me here. You led me here. I'm here because of you." And Elijah's having this conversation with God. And God says this: "You know what? Go and stand on the mountain at attention before God, because God will pass by." A hurricane wind ripped through the mountains and shattered the rocks before God, but God wasn't to be found in the wind. After the winds, an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle, quiet whisper. And after God did all this, he asked him the same question: "Why are you here?" And Elijah responds with the exact same words. But God does something different this time. Instead of revealing himself to him, he gives him the next steps. See, I think that you have to pay attention in that little nuance where Elijah tells God the same exact answer, but God responds differently. Because whenever I read that in the scriptures, whenever I read that in the Bible, it tells me that something changed. And it wasn't the words. See, when I read this story, I can relate with Elijah a lot. Because I've had those moments where I'm yelling at God. God's like, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "What kind of question is that? You brought me here. You led me here. 40 days, 40 nights, you fed me, sheltered me, and then you bring me to the top of this mountain. Then you have the gall to ask me, why am I here? I'm here because of you." And I love his response, though. Because basically, this is what he said: "I've been working my butt off following your plan, your mission. I've been trying to lead the people of Israel back to you, but instead of going back to you, they burned down the places of worship. They've ignored you. They've abandoned you. They've left everything behind. They've killed all my other friends, and now they're trying to kill me. How's your day?" That happens. And God's response to that answer is, "Well, let me show you who I am. The one that controls the wind, the one that controls the earthquakes." Please, God, don't send one right now. "The one that controls the lightning and the thunder, everything. Who has the power and the authority to smite us, to destroy us, but yet, instead of doing all of that, decides to talk to us. Not with the raised voice, but with the quiet whisper." When he does that, God asks Elijah the same question. But Elijah's response, even though the words were the exact same, something had changed. And I want to read that in verse 13. It said this: "When Elijah heard the quiet voice, he muffled his face with a great cloak, went to the mouth of the cave and stood there. A quiet voice asked, 'So Elijah, now tell me, what are you doing here? And Elijah said again, I've been working my heart out for God, the God of the angel armies, because the people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, destroyed your places of worship, murdered your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me. If you don't understand the difference between the first time and the second time, Elijah had a different posture, a different attitude. When the first time he was telling God the exact truth, exactly what he was feeling, he was telling him exactly what he was thinking. But he was allowing his fear and his doubt and his insecurities to question the plan of God. He was questioning God, am I doing the right thing? Because when I try and follow you, it just seems like everything goes wrong. It just seems like everything falls apart. It seems like I'm just stepping on quicksand. There's a movie that I absolutely love. I love sports movies. My wife says, Marcus, you watch way too many sports movies. I love them. Boxing, football, tennis, I don't care. If it's sports, I'm in. This coach is having a meeting with all his team. He's trying to pull them together off the field so they'll play together on the field. And so he asked them this question, what do you fear? And there was a couple guys on the team weren't too bright. They said bees. Of course, they were like, yeah, man, I'm allergic to bees, man. Bees, don't want that, none of that. And then somebody else chimes in, yeah, man, spiders too. You know, when you're sleeping and crawling on you, you're like, yeah, dude. The coach was not impressed. If you've ever coached, you've had those moments where you're just like, man, we're going to have to work hard today. Eventually, he kind of clues them into the fact, he's like, I'm not talking about your surface level fears. I'm talking, what are the fears that grip you and keep you up at night? One of the players chimes in and says, quicksand. And the ones that weren't too bright were like, yeah, man, now we got to worry about quicksand on the field too? And I was like, that's not what he meant. The coach knew what he meant, but he let him explain. Quicksand's when you're out there on the field and one thing goes wrong, and then another, and another, and another. And you try and fight it. But the more you fight it, the faster you sink. And the faster you sink, the harder it becomes to breathe, to think, till it's too late. And eventually you realize you're in over your head. That's quicksand. Sometimes following God and following His plan feels a lot like quicksand. Because we're trying to follow His plan, and Elijah was trying to follow God's plan. And he's like, look, I've been your prophet. I've been your spokesperson. I've been your mouthpiece this whole time. I've been trying to change the people of Israel, and instead of getting better, they've gotten worse. I've been trying to lead them back to your places of worship, and instead of leading them back there to worship, I've effectively led them to burn it down. I've been trying to tell them about your strength and your might and how you defend your people, and all your prophets are dead now. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me. As believers, there's moments where we have that fear. And we feel like we are in over our head. And I have to admit, without God, we are totally in over our heads. I have no problem admitting that. There are moments when I'm trying to fix my car and I am in over my head. And there are moments where I'm trying to follow God's plan and I feel in over my head. But those are the moments when I need to rely on God's strength, on his might, but most importantly, his word. After God revealed himself to Elijah, I love the way that he decided to display his strength. He's like, I can do all of that. I can do the miraculous. But the real work starts with the quiet whisper. Why? Because he wasn't whispering to his brain. He wasn't whispering to his ear. He was whispering to his heart. I find it that is the difference maker. Whenever fear is gripping you and you feel like you can't escape it, when you feel like you are trapped by it, that is the moment in time when you need to say, God, let me chase after your still, quiet voice. Let me chase after your word. Let me chase after your direction. Here's the honest truth. I'm in over my head. But God, I still trust your plan. Even when it feels like I'm in quicksand. God, I still trust you, even though I may question you. See, Elijah didn't have a crisis of faith. He had a crisis of trust. And so many times we, especially as Christians, as believers, we think that when somebody has fear that they don't have faith, but that's not true. A lot of times you still have faith, you still believe, you still know who God is, but what you are really questioning is his plan, his direction, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't even look right. And it feels like the world's against you. I know that's a feeling none of you have ever felt in your life, ever, because you're all good Christians. See, Elijah had that moment where he realized he was in over his head. And after God revealed himself to him, he said, okay, God, I get it. My heart needs to change. My attitude needs to be transformed. My mindset needs to be more trusting of you. If you want to escape fear, start there. Start by saying, you know what, God, I recognize this plan, total lunacy, but I trust you. God, I recognize that what I've been doing may not be working, but I'll follow you. God, I recognize that you are almighty and you are all powerful and I'm nowhere near as strong as you, but I will do what you ask. It's funny because after Elijah's posture changed, God didn't give him the whole plan. I kind of wish God did that. I wish God just downloaded, hey, this is your life. As long as you follow it, this is where you'll end up. God doesn't do that. God reveals his next step for your life, though. Because that's what he did. After Elijah's posture changed, God revealed the next steps. In verse 15, God said, go back the way you came through the desert to Damascus. There you're going to so forth and so forth. All God did was give him the next steps. But Elijah was happy with those steps. Elijah was content at that point. He said, you know what, God? I'm not going to question your plan. I'm not going to question your direction. I'm just simply going to follow. And you want to find something really interesting? Everybody that tried to kill Elijah eventually died. And he was the only one left, but he was alive. I find that really poetic and just kind of karmic. Because there's so many moments in our lives where we feel like everybody is against us. And God's like, don't worry, you don't know the end of this story. Just trust me in my plan. Escape from that fear that's gripping your heart and just follow the next step. and you'll get to where I want you to be. If the worship team can come on up. I want to ask you this question. What do you fear? Please don't say bees. You don't need to tell me, but I want you to answer that question for yourself. I want you to be able to answer that question in your heart. I want you to be able to, the next time that you pray, the next time that you read God's word, I want you to be able to be honest with him in a way that causes God to give you the next steps, because he knows that at that point you're ready. See, maybe you've been asking God, why am I here? Why have you led me to this point? And really, you should be asking, God, what's the next step? You brought me this far. I love how he took care of him in 40 days and 40 nights. He brought him that far. Why won't he take you further? Why won't God take you to the next promised land? Why won't God take you across the Jordan? Why won't God take you from one place to the place that you're supposed to be? It's not because he isn't working. And it's not because he isn't caring. It's because at times we aren't trusting and our fear is getting the best of us. At times we are so fearful that our faith is there, but it's in our head rather than our hearts. Our trust is there intellectually, but it's lacking spiritually. It's lacking in our hearts. If you want to learn how to escape from fear, then you need to learn to look within and ask the questions that you've been afraid to ask. I had a mentor who always said this, Marcos, you have not because you ask not. And I thought that was a little too prosperity gospel, but I also understand that there's this balance. That sometimes we're just not asking God the right thing. And that he withholds because our heart's not in it. And instead of being for God, we're just trying to preserve ourselves. And God's like, look, I'm not here to preserve just you. I'm here to accomplish my mission, my plan for your life. So I hope that when you pray, that when you read, that you will answer that question, what do you fear? And that you'll be honest with God. And this is my prayer for you, that he would tell you what the next steps are for your life. But do me a favor. Should he reveal them to you, do not run away from them. Do not ignore them. Do not reject them, but follow them. Because in doing so, you will see God do great and amazing things. We're going to transition into a time of communion as we celebrate what God did so that we could have a new lease on life. So Pastor, if you want to come on up and lead us through that.